Hi everyone. Because I'm by myself again this week, I'll just give you, as usual, a quick introduction to the workshop for this week. Um, to give you some guidance as to how to complete it in your own time. So, as typically, there's two parts, part A and part B. Part A is the part that you'd be submitting for your workbook, and that focuses on the theme of this week, which is law as a source of justice and the rather complicated interrelationship between the legal system and our ideas of justice. The second part, part B, again as usual, deals with study skills, and I'll talk to that in a moment. So, the first part, the first workshop, part A, the widower's lot. This is a scenario that gives you an opportunity to start balancing some of those ideas about justice that are implicit in law as a process. So, as we discussed earlier, there's the ideas of justice that we all hold individually that come from our beliefs, come from our background, our upbringing, and so on. Whereas when you have a legal system, when you have a social system, whether it be a complicated modern system or, in the case of the scenario, a more tribal, village, community-based system, you have to have a sense of common ground. You have to have a common understanding. And the way that is usually negotiated is in balance between rules and precedents. So rules are forward-looking statements. They tend to be more simply expressed, and they're of the nature of, from this point forward, everyone will do this. Precedents are examples of application of the rules, and they're backward-looking. They're saying, well, in the past, here's a specific case in the past where this issue came up, and this is how we applied the rules. And our legal system refers to uses both of those concepts, and generally our rules are in the form of legislation, and the precedents are in the form of judicial cases, although, as mentioned in the notes, there is some overlap between those. So in this case, we've got an issue in sort of a Bronze Age, early Iron Age, perhaps Viking style village, where there is a piece of land that there's no clear succession to, and an opportunity for the ruling council, or the council of elders, which you're representing, to make a decision as to who it should go to. So we've got a number of different contenders, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different villages, all of which got a claim or an argument as to who the land should go to. And then we've got some principles, and these are our rules. These are the rules that the council's made decisions of the basis in the past. And then we've got some evidence, and these are more looking at those precedents. They're like, well, this is how we've applied the rules in the past, and here's some guidance as to understanding how we use those rules. So there's no particular right answer here. And a lot of your decisions here, I mean, in terms of the workbook, it's about picking a result and arguing your reasons why you think that is the better claim, but doing it not in a way that is founded on just impressions or opinions or ideas, but on these principles. So we're moving into the idea this week of justice as a set of principled arguments. So it's not just, well, I like Dave and the Kindly, and I think their argument is good because it appeals to me, and I think it's the best decision to make. It's about using those principles. Is this about family coming first? Is this about the notion of fair decision making? Is this about caring for people in need? And this is a basic level illustration of what makes legal decision making different from other forms. And we often talk about rule of law. in very general ways. We talk about the threats to the rule of law breaking down, and the importance of it. And the key relevance of rule of law is that it's not a decision of any individual in isolation. It's about collective decision making on agreed principles. Now, that gets incredibly complicated when you've got a modern legal system and you've got so many different pieces of legislation made by so many different governments over time. You've got amendments to that legislation, and you've got many, many different cases that have been decided using that legislation. So this is a very much cut down, simplified version of the kinds of dilemmas we have in the current world. And of course, this is why we have lawyers. It's because we need professionals who are able to research and understand the complexity of the law. And in this unit, we're not training you to be a lawyer, of course, I've said that before, but we're giving you the basics of legal reasoning so that you understand when you end up working with lawyers, why they're arguing things in the way they do. And I've noticed this recently, and I think I noticed it most strongly with the questions over overturning Roe versus Wade in the US, that a lot of people's response to that decision was on the basis of whether they agreed or disagreed with the politics or the philosophy of the decision, whether they think abortion should be available or shouldn't be available. Whereas lawyers are supposed to not do that. In fact, your own values as a judge or as a lawyer shouldn't be relevant at all. Should go back to those fundamental principles. And in a case like Roe versus Wade, it's about the Constitution, in that case, the US Constitution, but it's about adhering to a document that defines governmental power. So yeah, I've noticed we've got this increasing tendency of people in public discourse to, well, just to be outraged generally, but to be outraged specifically about legal decisions because they like it or don't like it. And technically speaking, that shouldn't matter. It should be about the technical adherence to those rules. And if you don't like a decision, it's not really up to the court. It's not up to the law to change that outcome. It's up to Parliament to then go and respond to that and to change the law. And we'll talk about this a little more next week when we talk about the role of judges in making precedent. It's a little more complicated than that. And judges do certainly have some latitude to interpreting and understanding the law. But overall, let's go back to the basic starting point. The legal process is about objectively applying rules that other people have written. So here, we haven't got that in this scenario. We don't have the same sort of complexity. We don't have a complex modern state or anything like that. But we do have some very simple principles, and the idea that this decision about who gets the widower's lot, who gets to own the land, needs to come from a set of principles, not just from gut instinct or the vibe of the thing. All right, part B. We're continuing our series of looking at advice on study and study skills. This week, we're looking specifically at time and space. We're looking at the importance of being able to control not only your timetable, the time you commit to study, but also having a space in which you are able to study and to study free of distractions. Now, in an ideal world, of course, everyone would have an office in which they could shut the door, shut out all distractions, and set aside time to work on things. No, that's completely unrealistic. I, as a university lecturer, do have that, but of course, I also have a phone and email and all sorts of other things that interrupt that space. But I do know from my past experience that there are a lot of students who don't necessarily have the best accommodation for their studies in their timetable or in space. So in terms of space, I've known students who are trying to study in the corner of the kitchen table with younger siblings, screaming and demanding attention and going on, and that's really, really difficult. if you don't have a space that you can at least temporarily close off to be your own space, study is extremely difficult. And one thing that's worth considering there is public libraries. Public libraries have bookable space, or at least quiet space that you can go and work on your studies. And again, rather than persevering, sitting on the edge of your bed, sitting on the kitchen table, sitting in the lounge room with all distractions going around, it's often better to take yourself out to a different place. Most towns of a reasonable size will have a public library. They will have space that you can actually use, or maybe friends have a space that you can use, but it's really important to be able to set that aside. The other part of this workshop is thinking about time. Now, there's a link to a YouTube time budgeting exercise, which may not sound like the most thrilling thing in the world, but it's something I have used with students for about 40 years now, 30 years now. And generally speaking, everyone finds it's good value. So have a look at that video and go through the process of budgeting your time. Because basically it's about looking at your time, looking at your week, and figuring out how much time you actually have available for study. And almost everyone realizes they have a lot less time than they think they have. I won't explain it again now because I'll explain in the video, but I think a lot of people go into study with a very ad hoc idea of timing and timetabling, and they go, well, I'll make sure I go to my classes each week, and then I'll find some time in between when I have some spare time to do the readings and to catch up on my note taking and to start work on the assignments, and I'll get there. And then life being the way it is, there'll be a whole lot of catastrophes and distractions and other things that come along that eat into the time that you think have available. And then at some time you realize it's week 9 of the term and you haven't done anywhere near enough work. So the aim of thinking this week is about start thinking realistically about the time you have available to yourself. It doesn't mean, sacrificing your life for your studies, but it does mean being very realistic and looking at whether you actually are setting aside enough time. And if you're not, thinking about what does that mean in terms of your study for this term. Next week, I think it's the 30th, is census date, which is the last point at which you can withdraw from your studies. And honestly, this is a good time to think about withdrawing. If you've gotten to week 3 and you haven't got your time together, you haven't got your act together with where you're going with studying, there's nothing wrong with pulling out and trying again next time. If you don't, you're going to, and you end up failing, not only do you end up with a fail on your record, but you also end up with the bill for that term. So being realistic, have a look at your time, have a look at whether you realistically have enough time to set aside to your studies. And if you don't just tough it out and hope that miraculously somewhere in the next few weeks you'll find a lot more time to devote to your study. Be pragmatic about it, withdraw and try again next time. And as always, please make a time to see me, talk to me if you need any help or advice with this. But people have way too much study debt as it is. And unfortunately, we see people term after term after term dropping out partway through and just adding to that debt. And you don't want to be like that.